Logan had grown used to the quiet. At 34, he lived miles away from the nearest town, in a cabin surrounded by nothing but pine trees, wet earth, and the distant call of crows. Most people would have called it lonely. For Logan, it was the first place in years that felt anything like peace. He wasn't a recluse by choice. He used to be someone who laughed easily, talked openly, who believed in helping others no matter what. He served 4 tours overseas as an army medic. He'd saved lives with trembling hands and watched others slip away despite everything he knew how to do. But nobody comes back from that the same. The nights weren't quiet for him, not inside his head. The memories would come without warning. The men he couldn't save, the blood, the noise, that helpless sound a dying man makes. He left the military, moved into the woods with whatever money he had left, and never looked back. Days were simple now. Wake up early, chop wood, make coffee, check the traps, fix what was broken. No phone, no TV. He only kept an old radio, mostly for weather reports. And even that crackled more than it spoke. Some days he thought the silence would heal him. Other days it felt like it was swallowing him whole. But he stayed. Not because he didn't know what else to do, but because out here, nobody expected him to smile. Nobody asked him to forget. Nobody asked him to be okay. It was late autumn, and the trees had already started losing their leaves. The wind carried a cold bite, and the forest grew darker earlier each day. Logan had just started stacking firewood by the cabin wall when he paused. That feeling again. That shift in the air. The kind that tells you you're not as alone as you thought. He tried to ignore it, but something was coming. And this time, the silence wouldn't be enough to hide him. The storm rolled in fast that night. Thick clouds cloaking the sky, wind howling through the trees like something alive. Logan had heard storms in the forest before, but this one carried a different sound. A weight, an urgency. He sat by the fire, listening to the rain slap against the cabin windows, trying to distract himself with an old paperback he'd read a dozen times. Then it happened. A heavy thud. Not from the cabin. From the outside, somewhere past the porch. Logan froze. Another sound followed. A low guttural groan. Not human. Not any animal he'd ever heard either. It was pained. Struggling. He moved slowly, setting the book aside. Years of training had taught him to trust instincts that went deeper than reason. He grabbed his flashlight and the rifle leaning against the wall. He wasn't the type to jump at shadows, but no veteran ever took unknown sounds lightly. He stepped out into the storm. The rain was cold, sharp, beating against his jacket. He swept the flashlight across the yard, the beam cutting through the darkness. The trees swayed hard, branches cracking like bones in the wind. Then, at the edge of the tree line, he saw movement. Something big. Logan approached with caution, rifle raised. The beam of light landed on a massive form slumped against a fallen log. Dark fur covered, breathing raggedly, blood soaked into the wet earth beneath it. Logan's heart kicked hard. It wasn't a bear. Not even close. The creature was enormous, easily 7.5 feet tall, even curled over like that. Muscular, covered in deep brown hair matted with rain and blood. One arm was bent at a sickening angle, and its chest rose shallowly like every breath hurt. A Bigfoot. He'd heard stories, laughed them off. But this wasn't a story. This wasn't legend. It was real. And dying. For a long, tense moment, Logan stood frozen. Every part of him wanted to turn back. Let nature take its course. Let someone else discover this nightmare of a truth. But then he saw its eyes, half open, filled not with rage but fear, pain, something deeply, heartbreakingly human, and that was enough. Without another thought, Logan slung his rifle, dropped to the ground, and hooked his arms under the creature's shoulders. "Come on," he muttered through the rain. "Not tonight." It took everything he had, but inch by inch, Logan dragged the dying Bigfoot toward the only place he could save it, inside his cabin. Logan shut the cabin door behind them, the storm muffling into a dull roar outside. The creature lay sprawled on the wooden floor, its massive frame barely fitting between the table and the wall. Logan's breath came in sharp bursts, both from the effort and the shock of what he'd just done. He knelt beside it. Up close, the creature was even more unbelievable. Thick, coarse fur covered most of its body. but here and there were patches torn open, deep claw marks, a gash along the rib cage that was still bleeding slowly, dark and thick. Whatever had done this wasn't human. Logan grabbed his medical kit, a remnant from the old days, and got to work. He turned the flashlight toward the creature's face. Mud and blood smeared its fur, and then its eyes opened, amber shining even through the pain, staring straight into his. Logan stopped breathing for a second. There was no animal instinct there. No wild anger, just awareness, fear, confusion, and something else he couldn't quite name, something that looked an awful lot like trust. The creature didn't move as Logan cleaned the wounds, stitched the biggest tear shut, and bandaged what he could. It watched him silently, chest rising and falling in shallow, exhausted breaths. Every so often, its gaze would drift to Logan's hands, almost as if memorizing what was happening. Logan felt something shift inside him, a quiet note of responsibility, of connection. He'd treated soldiers who didn't trust him this much. When he was done, Logan leaned back on his heels, chest tight. If the world found out he was harboring this creature, especially a living Bigfoot, they wouldn't ask questions. They'd take it, cage it, study it, experiment on it, and they wouldn't stop there. They'd come for him too. Logan looked at the bandaged giant on his floor, barely living, completely vulnerable, and made a decision he couldn't undo. He wasn't going to turn this creature in. He was going to protect it, no matter what it cost. The morning came slow and gray, the kind of dawn that seemed to hold its breath. Logan barely slept. Each time the creature shifted or groaned, he snapped awake, half expecting to see soldiers storming through the door. But the cabin stayed quiet, for a while. Then the sound came, a deep, vibrating thunder from above. Logan stepped onto the porch just as a military helicopter tore across the treetops, its searchlight sweeping through the forest like a slow blade. Another followed, lower, louder, while making the windows tremble in their frames. Logan's heart sank. They were close. He scanned the tree line, catching sight of movement, not from wildlife, but something metallic rolling slowly down the old logging trail. A convoy, military green trucks unmarked, the kind that didn't belong to park rangers or hikers, the kind that didn't leave witnesses. Back inside, Logan turned on the radio, a habit he'd kept even in solitude. The voice crackled into life, strained, official, unidentified biological threat reported in the region. Military containment protocol is in effect. Residents are advised to stay indoors and report any unusual sightings immediately. Logan shut it off. Biological threat. That's what they were calling it. Not an animal, not a being, a threat. He felt the weight of what he'd done tightening in his chest. The creature, still breathing quietly in his spare room, wasn't just a wounded stranger anymore. It was a target, and by helping it, he'd made himself one too. Logan stood in the kitchen, staring out the window as another helicopter passed low enough to rattle the dishes. He couldn't run. He couldn't just sit and wait. What he'd chosen was no longer just about compassion. It was a fight to protect something innocent, and it had already begun. The days stretched into a quiet routine, one built not on words but on presence. Logan woke early, checked the windows, then checked the creature. Its breathing was still rough but steadier now. Every wound was healing with surprising speed, the thick fur around the bandages already beginning to grow back. Whatever it was, nature had made it strong. At first, the creature simply lay still, watching Logan move around the room. Its amber eyes followed him every time he brought water, adjusted the blankets, or cleaned the injuries. But slowly, something changed. The fear faded. The tension in its massive body eased. One afternoon, as Logan was rewrapping the stitched wound on its side, the creature raised a hand, huge, calloused, and gentle, and placed it lightly over Logan's. Logan froze. There was no force in the gesture, no threat. Just a quiet acknowledgement, a thank you spoken without sound. "You're welcome," Logan whispered, voice cracking slightly. From that moment, their bond grew, not through speech but through the small things. Logan brought food, simple things he hoped it could eat. Berries, fish from the creek, boiled potatoes. At first, the creature only sniffed, uncertain. But after a while, it accepted the food from Logan's hand, eyes soft, movements careful. Logan talked even though he knew it couldn't reply. He talked about his time in the army, the things he'd seen, the things he wished he hadn't. He talked about the silence he chose when he came here, and how empty it had felt, until now. The creature never interrupted, never made a sound beyond the slow, steady rhythm of its breathing. But it listened. Logan could feel that. It wasn't just surviving, it was trusting him. One evening, sitting on the porch of that same cabin, worn, but still standing, Michael spoke a line he'd never forgotten, one he carried from boyhood through every quiet winter of his life. We think kindness ends the moment we walk away, but sometimes it waits, and one day when life brings us to our knees, it walks back into our life and picks us up again. For the audience who lived long enough to know the difference between fantasy and truth, that message didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt like something real, something that reminded them of a time when a quiet act of kindness could echo further than they'd ever imagine. Michael's final words, spoken with a tremble in his voice and a peace in his heart. I helped save his life when I was a boy, and when I became a broken man, he saved mine. The legend of Bigfoot didn't end with sightings or blurry photos. It lived on, in a promise kept,